Welcome to the 1211 podcast, where we believe there is power in telling your story. We're all about giving space for real people to share how God has shown up in the middle of their pain, questions, victories, and transformation. Revelation 12:11 tells us, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And that's what we're doing here, overcoming, one story at a time. I'm Tabitha.
And I'm Jennifer, and today we are so excited to welcome someone whom I love dearly to the podcast. I'm excited for our listeners to get a sneak peek into the life of one of the strongest and most passionate people I know, my daughter, Anna Claire.
Anna Claire is a young woman who has found deep confidence in God despite growing up with challenges that could have easily written a different story for her life. From childhood struggles with ongoing physical health issues to facing the academic challenges of dyslexia, she's walked a road that many would have seen as limiting, but God has redefined every label and every boundary and filled her with great confidence and courage. What the world might see as a setback, God has used as a set-up for something much deeper. Anna Claire's story is a reminder that success in God's kingdom isn't measured by perfection, performance, or ease. It's about surrender, faith, and transformation.
Absolutely. Her story is full of boldness, compassion, and surrender. Anna Claire is learning to trust God with the parts of her story that don't always make sense. And in the process, she's becoming a voice for others who feel unseen or misunderstood. But before we dive into her powerful testimony, we'll start with some rapid fire fun. Everyone's favorite, Anna Claire.
You know the drill. We'll ask 10 questions. Do not be like Tabitha and overthink them. Just share the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. What is your go-to comfort food?
Probably pasta, but I have to have gluten-free pasta now, so it's still good.
Yeah, that's good. It is good. You do a good job with that.
If you had a superpower, what would it be and why?
I think invisibility, because I like to eavesdrop on people sometimes, like in the caf at school, but it's probably not a good thing. But I sometimes my ADHD brain can't help it. You just overhear it.
Yeah, you and your sister both would be great private investigators. By the way, you're really good at that. Okay, what is your favorite song right now?
Probably What a God by SCU Worship. It's really good. It's a newer one.
Awesome.
One thing people might be surprised to learn about you.
That's a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some idea about what people might be surprised because I've lived with you a long time.
Probably that I know how to quilt.
Yeah.
I make blankets.
Yeah, that's really good. That's something I was thinking too, is how good you are at as a seamstress. Yeah. What's one word that your closest friends and family would use to describe you?
Probably like bubbly, but people that are close to me probably don't see that side of me.
Full of energy and excitement. Yeah, I used to say when Anna Claire was little, like she was excited over whatever. She was easy to keep happy and easy to please. I used to say, I could say to her when we were homeschooling, she was little, like, I think today we're going to go on a tour of the sewer plant. And she'd be like, okay, what should I wear? What can I wear? I cute boots. That would have been her. She was excited about everything.
That sounds like Emily.
Yes, I tell you, they're the same person. I was convinced of that.
What is your favorite way to relax after a long day?
Laying in bed and watching YouTube or reading or crocheting, just in bed.
In bed.
Yeah, I love my bed. It's my safe place.
Yeah. If you could have coffee with any person from the Bible besides Jesus, who would it be?
Probably Ruth.
Mm.
She's just cool, I think. And her story is very different than a lot of Bible stories, so.
That's a very good story.
Yeah. Favorite Bible verse to cling to during difficult moments?
Psalms 139, verses, I think, 13 through 14. It's one I've, cling to since probably, 8th grade. But it's one that Mom used to always say to us when we were, growing up and stuff.
What's one thing that's been making you laugh lately? You said just last night that your brother's the funniest person you know.
Yeah.
He makes you laugh all the time. And he loves it, and he does it on purpose. Like when she laughs, he just amps it up another notch.
That's probably true.
We were saying last night at his ball game, she's like, I wish I could mic him when he plays baseball because he talks to himself.
He's like in the outfield and he talks.
Yeah, and then the whole time he's that bad, he's talking, and we're like, what is he saying?
His friend that is catching. And
it would be funny because there's no telling.
When you said his friend, I was thinking like an imaginary friend.
No. He's talking to everybody. When he's running bases, he talks to the people on the other team. At every base he gets to, he talks to the coaches. But, like, you know, if he's playing third, he talks to the other team's third base coach. Like, he has conversations the whole time he plays. And we're like, what is he saying? And we can see people laughing, and we're like, what is he saying? So, yeah, she said it all the time that he's the funniest person I know.
If you could take a class on anything, no grade, just for fun, what would it be?
Probably like drawing or painting.
You're good at that, So thanks for letting us peek into your personality a little to let our listeners get to know you. Now we're going to get into the heart of your story. What I want you to do is to start out by just telling our listeners a little bit about who Anna Claire is.
I'm 19 years old. I go to college at Tribeca Nazarene University. I just finished my freshman year there. I'm studying religion with a focus in youth ministry and a minor in intercultural studies.
Which means what? Explain to someone that
intercultural studies is basically, in our world today, within a few city blocks, there's multiple cultures, backgrounds, ethnicities, religious beliefs, political beliefs. It's just understanding how in ministry do we do that, and how do we love your neighbor well, but also preparing people for the mission field and missions out of America and missions just down your street.
Yeah. It's good. So tell us more about yourself.
I was born and raised in Tullahoma, Tennessee. I only ever lived in one other place, Oklahoma, for about 6 months of my life. And I grew up dancing. That's always been a big part of my life. I danced for 15 years. I'm really passionate about art and just creating. I love to bake, and I just like using my hands. I've always said I have like grandmother hobbies. I'm like a grandma.
Yeah.
I like to crochet, sew, read. I am the middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother, and I think I definitely have middle child tendencies.
You're interesting, though, because for 7 years you were the youngest child, so you kind of have the interesting youngest and middle child.
Right, so yeah. I don't know. I don't know what.
So what would you say to someone about what your life was like growing up? Like as a child, as a teenager, getting to the place that you are now, as you're kind of approaching young adulthood, what would be some of the ways you would describe your childhood?
Independent. I was homeschooled for the first 6 years of school. So I had a lot of free time, which I think is really why I am so interested in like sewing and stuff, because I had the time to be creative and explore my interests more than probably kids that were in public school at the time. We grew up going to church, and I always knew Jesus, but I don't think it was until middle school that I really decided to make it a personal relationship with him. It was kind of more of my ticket out of hell rather than a personal relationship with him. And I think I'm still, just now with my religion classes at school, fully understanding what it looks like to have that relationship with God rather than just the ticket out of hell. I would say I had a good childhood. It was fun and exciting, but there was definitely moments in my childhood that I remember as like markers of time. Majority of them weren't great, but my childhood was good, and it was like comfortable.
So unpack a little bit of that for our listeners. What were some of those struggles that you think that you, that like you said, mile markers or pivotal moments that you think were impactful on you and where you are today?
Well, from the time I was born, I was always kind of sick until I was around 7 years old. When I was 6, I got diagnosed randomly really sick with E. coli for about a week in the hospital. And up until about a year after that, I was just constantly sick and no doctors could figure out what was wrong. But I remember being diagnosed with E. coli for a week in the hospital because most kids don't survive that, especially at the time. There wasn't really treatment options for, you kind of just have to ride it out. And at the time, I was like, oh, I get to be in the hospital. It's like a resort. They brought me free food all the time, which I now know was not free. But yeah, and I had like an arts and crafts room. And so like my special nurse would take me to the arts and crafts room. But at the time, it was fun in my brain. But looking back, it very much wasn't fun.
Yeah, you had no idea how terrifying it was for your parents or the doctors and nurses.
And then a few years later, we moved to Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And also at the time, I was just excited. I thought it was like something fun to do. Like I said earlier, I was just a very excited, like I was just an excited person. So anything big in life, in the moment, I think it's fun. But yeah, so we moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. We were only there for 6 months. And I think looking back, that had a bigger effect on my life than I would have thought of at the time. I mean, we never lived in like my childhood house again. Just friend dynamics shifted at church and stuff when we came back to Tullahoma. And so it was just, I think, hard on me relationally when we came back. And I don't think at that time I like recognized that as the cause of it, I guess. The next moment that I would think of as like a time marker was when I was 9. My papa died, and that was like the first person like really close to me that I've ever lost. And he just always showed us, all of his grandkids, a lot of love. And he was probably one of the best representations of Christ I had growing up. Just because he let Jesus impact his life in every way. And every person he met, he was a kind face to. And he just loved us all very well. So that was hard. And it shifted family dynamics in a way I don't think any of us in our family expected. And then a few years after that, when I was in 5th grade, I was diagnosed with a learning disability called dyslexia. And that put a label on issues I had struggled with in school for a very long time. I always kind of just felt like I couldn't read. Like I didn't understand why I couldn't read. I felt there was this expectation on me to just to figure it out and to read. And something in my brain just couldn't understand the words on the page and memorizing things. I have a great memory when it comes to like moments in my life and things that people have told me, but when it comes to like learning things, it's like in one ear and out the next, not because I'm not listening, but because my brain
can't like root in the brain.
Yeah. But yeah, those are the big moments of my childhood that I remember impacting me.
So much of our childhood and adolescence is formational in who we become. How would you say those challenges have formed you into the woman you're growing into be for the good, and maybe ways that have been very difficult to overcome?
It's okay. You can take a minute.
Yeah. I think for me, my adolescence story it impacted me today because I think it taught me a lot of how to overcome, and to not let things that have happened to you define who you are. I actually took a class this semester, like adolescent development. So it's funny that y'all asked me that because I saw like the very like psychological way and studies of how it impacts your life. And so when I was in that class, I was like reflecting a lot on like my own adolescence and how it's impacted my behavior, how I react to certain situations. I've always kind of had this mentality of like, I'm not going to be a doormat. And I think it's because of my like childhood of just like overcoming a lot, that it's like, well, I've overcome this, so you're not going to treat me like a doormat. Which sometimes gets me in trouble.
Absolutely.
I'm learning.
Not everyone appreciates boldness and courage and people speaking their mind, right? Yeah.
But that's the biggest way I think I've seen like the adolescent formation in my life, of just like, it's made me a more confident person. It's made me be able to not let people treat me like I'm dirt or a doormat. It's given me a confidence to know like my worth.
Yeah. I think having had a front row seat to all of that, and when it's happening, you're not really sure how things are forming us, right? None of us know in the moment, like, oh, this is going to make me more confident, or in the middle of difficult things. But because so much of Anna Claire, when we go back and talk about her first 7 years and the physical struggles that she had, it was a lot. There was a lot of time spent in doctors' offices and at Birmingham Children's Hospital and at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, and doctors trying to get answers. It all started, well, she started at 2 weeks old sick, and then so literally it was just this roller coaster of a journey. And when she was a year old and went for her immunizations, within 2 weeks, she was really, really ill, and her blood counts bottomed out and looked like a child who was on chemo, and they couldn't figure out why, what was killing off all of her good cells and things like that. And so this was a journey that once that started, it was every 6 to 8 weeks, every 2 months. She spent 2 weeks on isolation. She couldn't leave her home because her blood counts were too low. But I think I'll look back, and so much of that, sometimes we'll talk about it and she doesn't remember it at all. Like there was one moment where she had a bone marrow test done at Vanderbilt Children's, and I remember to this day, I think I almost could take you to the room that she was in, standing outside in the hallway while she screamed for 30 minutes while they did this bone marrow test. No, not a spinal to check for spinal. You're checking for spinal meningitis. So anyway, we were sitting out in the hallway, and the bone marrow test was at Birmingham Children's, and she was asleep for that. But this spinal, she was in kindergarten, she was not asleep for it. And for 30 minutes, Jason and I stood in the hallway while doctors and nurses held her down on the table, and she screamed, and they were drawing the fluid and all this. And she has no recollection of that, which is interesting to me, and how the brain like just protects us from some things and some memories. So even though she doesn't remember all of those things, I've said about her that I do believe it has made her a fighter, and like she's determined. So her dad and I say about her all the time, like there's nothing she can't accomplish if she wants to, because she's got a determination that is strong, and she's strong-willed, which means as a parent sometimes that's challenging, but at the same time it makes her be able, like I've said since she was little, like we could probably disappear for a couple weeks and she'd survive. She'd be good as long as she had food in the house and something to sew. She'd be happy. No, she wouldn't miss us. And so I think about like a lot of times what's forming us and making us in the moment, we don't even realize how it's forming us and how it's creating who we are. And the thought that makes me have a little bit, Anna Claire, is, Tabitha, we talked about this, like I think when we encounter people, the moment that we encounter them has been defined by everything in their life before that moment. And I think sometimes we can fail to realize that, like when people seem strong-willed or overconfident, or they seem mild or meek, all these different things, that it all is like a culmination of everything that's happened to them to that moment. And so it's easy, if we're not careful, to write people off or to judge people by those singular encounters. And I would love for you to speak a little bit about how, like, your experience of how do we go about life so that we make sure that we honor people's stories. And what I mean by that is everyone has a story and it determines who they are. And sometimes we can write people off if we're not careful. But how do we live through this lens of giving people grace and also recognizing that the moment we encounter them is a single moment in this journey of life that has led to them to the place where they are? So what would you speak into that as far as, even at school, when you're encountering people that are coming from all walks of life and who aren't like you, how do we be, and it's intercultural studies, as you're talking about this, like the people we encounter all have a story. So how do we make sure that we are handling their stories with grace and mercy and love and meeting them where they are, not where we think they should be or where we would want them to be?
Yeah. I think for me, in the past year at school, this is something like the Lord's really challenged my heart with, and it's that, like, it's not my place to judge anyone, like, point blank period. Like, even if they've hurt me, even if their life presents in a way that I wouldn't live, like, it is not our place to judge. We don't have that power, or like, we don't have the name to, like, that is not it's not our job. So encountering people with grace and love, I think, is the biggest thing. I went on a mission trip on spring break to New York City through Tribeca, and I encountered a lot of people there that going in was scary. We worked in Harlem, which is one of the biggest people dumping grounds in America. There are homeless people quite literally everywhere, but like, the streets are their home. And so when I first stepped off the subway, I was like, I like fish out of water, like, where am I? Like, it was very jarring to me because I had never experienced anything like that. But as we served there throughout the week, I realized, like, these people, like, they're not dangerous. Like, yes, you do have to have the awareness, but they're not dangerous. And like, we were cleaning up the streets, like, we picked up like 20 bags of trash in like a few hours. And like, they recognized that we were like making their home more beautiful for them. And multiple people who were high or drunk came up to us and were like, thank you for doing this. And we were working with a couple that live in Harlem. They're missionaries. They live there full time now. And essentially what we were doing was helping them create relationships within Harlem. And so I think that was cool to see, like, that stepping ground of like, we were doing something, not even wanting recognition for it, but we were coming in and loving the people that we didn't even know. So the Sundbergs, who were the couple we were working with, could get to know these people's stories.
Building bridges, right? Yeah, their relationships.
And I think something that was cool to see was, we don't know any of the people's stories on the street, but we encountered them then in that moment. And whether the Sundbergs get to know these people more deeply, or they write the Sundbergs off and they're like, we don't really want a relationship with you, like, they recognized us and they know that, like, there's people still doing good. Because I think for a lot of those people, it's someone's wronged them, they've seen it, like, too much bad in the world. It's like, I think a lot of them just like seeing that they're still good.
Absolutely.
And there's still people wanting to do good.
Well, there's people who still care enough to get to know them, which I think is the story for all of us, is to recognize that every person you encounter has a story that's bigger than the moment that you encounter them. And like, just the value that we give people by wanting to know their stories or wanting to connect with them. So as I think about that, and as you think about growing up in a world that really does try to tell us who we should be, who we are, the world that kind of puts a label on us and tells us how we should fit in. What were, growing up, some of the things you've shared with us, what were some of the labels or limitations that you feel that the world tried to place on you growing up?
Well, one with my dyslexia was like, I'm not smart, you're dumb, you're not intelligent, you're not capable. Those were big ones with that. I always struggled with like being artsy and stuff, especially in Tullahoma. I feel like sports is a really big part of our culture in Tullahoma. And so when like all my friends, once I went to like public middle school, were doing sports, it was like, oh, like where do I need to try to find a spot to fit? And so I did cheer, and I had fun doing cheer, but like I think it was more of a trying to fit thing than like, is this what I'm passionate about?
Being true to yourself.
Yeah. And so like I always kind of felt like not capable, dumb, like unathletic, like all those feelings of like, why can't I physically play sports? But like still like degrading almost my like abilities and gifts that God's given me, like to be artsy and like to see things in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy to let the expectations of the world and the labels that the world puts on us shape our identity and who we are. In Romans 12, Paul talks about how we shouldn't conform to the pattern of the world, but instead we should be transformed by the renewing of our mind. You found a different source of identity than the expectations of the world. Can you talk about how you started to realize your worth wasn't in performance or perception, but in Jesus, and what that journey looked like and what that even looks like now?
Yeah. I would say it started in 8th grade when COVID happened. I had a lot of anxiety and fear of death. I really was in a dark place during COVID, not because I was scared of COVID, but I was more scared of like, where was my soul going? Which now, studying in college, I realize it's such a bigger picture than like, where's my soul going? But
when you're surrounded by death and that's all you're hearing, it becomes scary.
It was a scary thought to have, and that was kind of a pivotal moment of like, okay, like what do I want to live for, and like who do I want to let define me? Up to that point, I let a lot of people in like middle school like define who I was. And then throughout high school, it was an ongoing journey of just like releasing that. I was in public high school and through 10th grade, and I just again was kind of going back into a dark place. I was in marching band, like I had a ton of friends. I was doing well in school, but I just wasn't finding joy in that place. And so I decided to homeschool. And a lot of people were like, why would you homeschool your last 2 years of high school? Like, you're going to miss all the senior things. Like, I was going to be by myself at home most days. Like, people didn't really understand it. And I got questioned a lot about it. But I was kind of just like, like, this is what's better for me mentally. I just had to, like, kind of stand my ground and be like, it might not make sense to you, but
I'm not trying to
it's what's better for me, and it's what I feel the Lord is leading me to, which led me to be able to work at a preschool 4 days a week and just have a lot more free time to do the things I enjoy and be a lot more involved at church. And it just gave me the freedom to be a part of a lot more opportunities. And I think working at that preschool for 2 years, like, it really helped me step into my call more of ministry and just like getting to spend time with little kids, like, or at least for me, like, that makes me so happy and like brings me so much joy just to see their joy. But I think just allowing him to remind me that like he's the one that formed and shaped me, and like he's the one that's called me by name, and like none of the other people have. And like he's the one that has created the labels of your life. And like one label I've always kind of worn is like awkward. Like I've always been an awkward person, I feel like. And like in awkward situations, I don't know what to do. I just like tense up and get really anxious. And like I think sometimes I'll be like, well, why am I not feeling awkward right now? Like normally I would feel like really weird.
It's normal for me.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, it's because like God is helping me through this. Like he's reminding me that like I'm okay and like I can function and I can get through this situation. But I think just allowing him to be the one that forms my identity and allowing me to kind of drop those labels that I felt the world put on me my whole life of like, this is not what reigns true.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I've seen you overcome so much, and because of that, I do tell people all the time that you're the most determined and hardest working person I know. Somewhere along the way in your life, you decided that you weren't going to let obstacles define you or detour you, and you dealt with a lot of obstacles and challenges. So how have the things that once felt like boundaries to you or limitations or things that would hold you back become the very things that God is using to form your heart, and then through that giving you purpose and confidence in your calling?
I think since I always felt very misunderstood with my dyslexia, it was something I didn't really want people to know for a long time. And so a way I invited those labels in, just not by not being honest about like why I struggle to learn. I felt misunderstood, and I think now in my calling with feeling a call to intercultural studies and to the people that don't have a voice, I've always been very passionate about justice. And as a kid, I was always like, why do I care so much about like people having justice and people being seen as like who they really are?
You get fiery mad about it.
Yeah,
I'm here to tell you, it's not being mistreated.
But because like I now realize like I've always been given that like heart for justice and things being made right, because like there is a day and a time when like I'm going to have to like speak up for that. And like,
and you've already done that many times in your life. Yeah.
I'm like, I feel like I'm called to be the voice for the people who don't have a voice for themselves, and who the world has cast out as gross and disgusting. And the reality is like we are all invited to have a seat at the table. And I think some of the limits that I experienced in life was because I felt like I didn't have a seat at the table. And I think that has created just like a fire in me to make sure that everyone feels like they do. And even if they don't accept the seat, like I want everyone to know and feel that they have a spot to be welcomed there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, it's hard, but it's beautiful. Obviously, dyslexia is still part of your life, but instead of seeing it as a burden, you've come to embrace that you just learn differently, and that doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you, or it makes you less than someone else who doesn't have dyslexia. That's such a beautiful shift, and something that I think a lot of people need to experience. How did God help you get to this place?
Well, like, what were some of the, like, what do you think were some of the people he put in your life? Like, did he do this through people? Did he do it through experiences, encounters, those kind of things that helped you get to a place where you could understand that it wasn't a bad thing, that it was something that God wanted to use?
I think for one, my mom always, you always like vouched for me in school once I was in public school, to have accommodations and like to encourage me to fight for myself, and to be like, it's not a bad thing. You learn differently. You just have to take a different route to get to the same destination as everyone else. And that's not bad. It's just the reality, and it's different. And then, truthfully, in the last year, Trevecca, the lady that's over disability services, she has been like awesome with fighting for me for like my accommodations and different things. And it's been very empowering to us. I think in college, like I could have been really defeated again with a higher learning, like higher education. But she's like reminded me all the time when I meet with her, like, we want you to succeed and to have all the things you need to do that. So I think just different people sprinkled throughout my life. I had some great middle school teachers who always, fought for me to have the right accommodations. And if something wasn't working, they were very willing to adapt. I had a math teacher when we were doing the word problem section of our class that on a test, he was like, she does not test like this normally in math. And so he sat there and asked me the questions and had me answer them out loud to him rather than writing them, because he was like, I see that this is like, it's just not working for her because it's word problems. And
that was a beautiful time in your life, and it could have been a very difficult time. But I think about, she transitioned from homeschool to public school as a 6th grader. So she had never been to public school except for one day. And then she went to public school, and middle school's a hard time. I was a middle school teacher at the time, which God just opened those doors, and it happened to be that I was able to be there during those times, those years of her life. But middle school can be so hard. But I think I saw in Anna Claire that was a place where your confidence really started building. And I would say shout out to the teachers at East Middle School that were there when you were there, because so many of them, and who aren't there now, most of them aren't there now, retired, but they spoke life into her, and they saw her level of intelligence, because most dyslexic people have a very high IQ. They just learn differently, right? So that being dumb is the farthest thing from the truth for them. They're lots of successful people have dyslexia when you start researching. And I think about specific people who would say, she advocates for herself better than any kid I've ever seen. And somewhere along the way, in that environment, she felt safe to be a voice for herself. And I think that really is where some of her confidence in who she was, who you are, Anna Claire, grew, because they gave you the space and they saw the potential in you, and they weren't threatened by you advocating for yourself or asking, say, like, I need extra help with this or whatever. And so I think that's just the power of a good teacher. So I think those who are listening need to recognize that there is a lot of power that you hold when you're a teacher. And I'm so thankful for those who did that for Anna Claire, and who are still doing it at the college level, because I do think it makes all the difference in the world of us being able to just be comfortable in our skin and who God's created us to be. Because as a classroom teacher, I know every kid in my classroom was different, and they had different needs, and that nothing about them was a mistake or bad. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind as well. So,
I want to say this real quick. It makes me think of the disciples and Jesus, how he didn't approach all of them the exact same way, and he picked them all specifically because
and they were unique.
They were so what they could bring. Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, when you think about it, especially if you watch The Chosen, and you see their interactions, and you realize how, because like sometimes I think when we read stories in the Gospels, we're like, oh, they were all just sitting around, they were best friends, and they all weren't actually, and they really probably were, because they were all very unique and different, and they all were some of them were quirkier than others, and some of them had really strong opinions. Peter, and somebody else was over here probably thinking, I think Peter needs to just learn to be quiet, like all these dynamics that were that was a reality for them too. And so like understanding how boring our world would be if we were all just the same. But also I think one of the things, Anna Claire, when you were little, somewhere along the way when she was little, and I had taught for years at this point, and she was struggling with the reading, and I knew early on, like, there's more here, because she was so good in math and so good with her hands, and like she said, creatively, like, I mean, she could build anything. Like even as a young 4 or 5-year-old, like if we didn't get to putting a toy together fast enough, I'd go in there and she'd have the whole box dumped out in the middle of the floor. And before I did it, she had put the thing together. And she loved screwdrivers. She loved to take stuff apart, put stuff back together. So like her spatial sense was incredible. Like she had just the kind of that, she's always had that entrepreneurial spirit, and you've always had that entrepreneurial mind about you and like creating and making. And so like there were all these beautiful things about her that because the world says your reading level, how fast you read, all these things are what determine, in public school especially, just I'm going to say I've been there, I know, God protected her because she did not spend those early years in public school. And I look back and say it would have been devastating to her, because she mentioned it early on. You mentioned it, that you had the space to also not just spend all your time doing things you struggled with, but because we were homeschooling, we could balance that with you having the time to enjoy the things that you were good at. And we could balance, like not letting everything about it be about a grade or a score or how many words per minute we're reading. And even though I knew there was a struggle and we were working ourselves to death, lots of tears at our dining room table, things I look back and regret as a mom, honestly, because I think, man, I pushed way too hard there, or I overreacted there, or why did I act that way? But it was just because we were all frustrated, and I knew that she was brilliant, but we couldn't get them. Sometimes we couldn't say the same, like you 3 times on a page, and I'm like, the word is you.
Right.
You, it's still you. And I look back and I'm like,
memorization.
It was just another way. Like his words were hard. And so anyway, it was frustrating, so frustrating. But somewhere along the line, the Lord helped me hear the story of someone who is in Christian music. And I was at a concert that he was doing, and he shared his story about how he was severely ADHD, and how even then he had to rely on the lyrics on the teleprompter. And he said, these are songs I wrote. Like, I'm the one who penned these words to start with, but in a concert with all the stimulation and everything going on, sometimes I can't even remember the words I wrote because of my ADHD. And he talked about how the Lord, for a long time, he questioned God. Why? Like, God, I could be so much more successful in ministry. I could be so much better at this if I didn't struggle in this way. And he's also a youth minister at his church. And he said the Lord finally started showing him, no, you wouldn't be as successful without this struggle, because it is the struggle that helps you be the youth pastor that you are, because you see kids differently because of it. You meet them differently in their places of struggle and the obstacles because of it. And somewhere in Anna Claire, that was in Anna Claire's childhood, like elementary age, and I became determined, like, to help her understand dyslexia is not something for you to be ashamed of. Like, the Lord doesn't make any mistakes. He creates you like he does. It's a challenge and it's a struggle, but he will use it to help you become who he's created you to be. And I see that in your life, Anna Claire, that you do have so many of your best qualities connect back to that dyslexia and the thing that would have been your biggest struggle. And I think it's beautiful to see how the Lord takes what the enemy would use to destroy us and to discourage us. And that's the very place that he gives us a ministry and a message. And I just want to continue to encourage your heart, Anna Claire, to just be confident in who you are, because there's other people who need to be told, whatever your struggle is, it's not a mistake. God's not written you off because of it. Actually, he's written you in because of it. Like, there's something he wants to do, and he's written you into this plan that he has because he wants to use you in that way. And so just to continue to think about that. But I know that you're still learning to trust God with every part of your life as you're navigating these years of early adulthood, and especially the moments that don't make sense, or the ones that threaten your peace and cause fear and anxiety in your life. And that's a hard, honest place to be. So what does trust look like for you right now, day to day? And what are some practical steps that you take as a 19-year-old who feels called to ministry, who knows the Lord is leading you and guiding you, but still faces all the stuff that any other 19-year-old faces, right? God hasn't just removed you out of all those things. So what are some practical steps that you take to walk in freedom and to continue to trust him day to day?
I think one, surrounding yourself by people who will encourage you and not tear you down. And for me, like, that's mainly like my family. But also just for me, it's always been worship music. I think secular music's like, it's good, it's catchy, but I think not consuming my brain with the messages of those songs. And so I think in the last year, I really tried to replace a lot of music with more worship music. And one thing I'm still trying to get better at is, like, in my free time, just to sit in silence rather than always having to have noise go on.
That's hard. That's hard for a lot of us.
And I'm still working on that. And then also just, like, prayer, and that's something I'm still trying to get better at, is just like praying when I'm driving in the car, or just rather than just like when I lay my head on my pillow at night, right? Like praying in my quiet time, praying if I'm sitting at a stoplight, like finding those times to be with God, that I could be watching YouTube or listening to music or on the phone with someone, whatever, you know.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you said, you're learning to be in relationship with him. All day long. I just
try to get out of hell, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
What would you say to someone who feels like they don't measure up by how they learn, how they look, how they live, what their past looks like from their childhood? What would you tell them if they don't feel like they measure up?
I think that your worth is not defined by the past or the people who try to put labels on you. Recently, there was a group of kids that went to a youth event on our district, and they all came back on the Sunday after them wearing shirts that said, "This is my story." And one of the girls went down to the altar that Sunday, and I was like, nothing that you've experienced in life, like now or in your past, is defining your story. And I think, like, I told her, I was like, the one that holds the pen is God, and no one else can label your story or define what it is.
Unless we give them the pen,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's good. No one else can write your story unless you give them the pen.
Yeah.
I want to insert this. This is not on what we had planned, but I do think this is important because as I'm thinking about you, and it kind of relates to my next question, but so you've mentioned having compassion for those who feel unseen or who feel like they don't fit in or they don't measure up and all those things, and the Lord's building compassion in you because you've experienced that firsthand yourself. But how can the rest of us be better at that too? And I think back to a specific situation. I look in your middle school years, and the Lord really was so good with the friends he gave you who were willing, that you could be open with and say, I struggle, and like they were willing to help you with notes or spend extra time. Like, the Lord blessed you in so many ways in that, and I think that was a part of you being able to be comfortable in your own skin as some of those closest friends that are still your friends today that he put around you. But I'd also think about an encounter that we had when you were in high school that, as your mom, was hurtful or painful to me because we were in a group setting where there was a game being played and you were struggling a certain way, and someone in that group, another teenager, well, I know they didn't mean it, but they were mocking almost and making fun of you because you were in, because it was a game based on, I don't know, words and phonics and stuff, right? Yeah. And her comment to you was hurtful. So I think what can you share with the rest of us? And not just about dyslexia. This is about anyone who's different than us. And because if we, as Christ followers, are really going to do what he's commanded us to, and we're going to go into the world, then every single day we're going to encounter people who are different than us in whatever way. Maybe they learn different. Maybe they speak a different language. Maybe their political views are different than us. Maybe their lifestyle looks totally different than us. And if we're not encountering anyone who's different than us, then we're living as hermits, which goes so against the gospel. But even like in simple things like your dyslexia and how people, you had a lot of really kind people and life-giving people. But there were situations where people were not life-giving, and they kind of, you were the brunt of their joke, right? And it's hurtful. And if we're not careful, that happens a lot. So how can the rest of us, how can all of us, because all of us have someone who's different than us. So we all need to learn this lesson. What can you say that you think is important for us to remember about how we can truly live out the grace, mercy, love, compassion of Jesus in a way that really does do what he tells us to do, to love our neighbor well?
Yeah. I think first by recognizing like we were all created and designed for a purpose and to be a part of his kingdom. So the gay couple that lives down the street, the immigrant that's a few blocks down, the Christian couple that lives across from you, like whatever it is, we're all invited to be a part. And I think to really look like the kingdom of God, it means that we're going to love our neighbor where they are and for who they are in the moment. It might not be how you think a Christ follower would look, how you think they should live their life. Like, it means loving them right where they are. So if it means inviting the two gay guys that live down the street from you to church, then like that's what you're called to do. It means inviting them around your dinner table and having a meal with them and hearing their story and coming in, not judging their story, not judging their lifestyle, but saying, I'm here to love you. I might not agree with your lifestyle, but I'm here to love you and I'm here to be a friend to you. I think it's, I'm being honest, kind of ridiculous that in today's culture we've written certain people off because, especially as Christians, and we think that a gay couple shouldn't come to our church or immigrants shouldn't be invited to our church because that's exactly who Jesus would have sat and ate dinner with. And
yeah, you were just sharing with me yesterday when you came home and you had spent some time at your boyfriend's house with his family, that they had a sign at their church or on. No. He said this in his sermon. Yes, he said this in his sermon. Share what he said in his sermon.
Shout out to Wesley.
Shout out to Wesley.
He said,
I've heard this before, and I think it's great. I think I do need a sign in my house that says it.
He said, rather than building your walls higher, how about we build our tables longer?
So building higher fences or higher walls. Yeah. What if?
Yeah.
What if everybody who professes to know Jesus would build a longer table?
Yeah.
And invite people to sit around it. Yeah.
That's exactly what Jesus would have done. And
other people didn't understand Jesus. So sometimes we're going to do things in love in a way that people won't understand if we're really following him.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. It makes me think a lot of times we are our own worst enemy.
Absolutely.
It's our fear and it's our lack of faith and those kinds of things that make those situations uncomfortable for us.
Yeah, it's fear. I think you're right, Tabitha.
Yeah.
A lot of it, a lot of the reasons we react the way we react is fear. Fear of being inadequate, fear of not knowing what to do, fear of not knowing how to be in a certain situation, fear of the unknown. And also that's where we have to be careful about what we're listening to, because if we listen to mainstream media all day long, you're going to live a life of fear, and they're going to be telling you build higher fences, build higher walls, keep people out, protect yourself, and that goes so against the gospel. It does.
Yeah.
And I would like to share a story actually about that of my experience at school this year. There was a guy that me and my friends were friends with. He made not a great choice, and a bunch of people found out about it. And it was a matter of him getting to stay at school or not, if the deans would choose to let him stay on campus or not. And one day at lunch, he was sitting by himself, and I just had this feeling like I need to go sit with him. like, no matter the choices he made or the labels people put on him, like, I need to go meet the person that sits with him. But I didn't, because I was like, what if people are like, what is she doing? Like, that was my thought. And
The fear of people, right?
yeah, and
Approval or judgment.
like, I don't know if he'll be back next semester or not. But I like regret not going to sit with him out of fear of like what people would say. And I left lunch that day and being like, I should have done that. Like, I should have been the person to go and sit with him, because seriously, probably in the time you need people and Christians the most to stand beside him was when we all were like, your choices are making me go further from you. So
yeah.
But
that's humbling for us to recognize we don't get it right, and we won't every time. We'll look back and there'll be times where we go, you know what, I didn't love in that situation the way Jesus would. Thank goodness for his grace and mercy in our life, but just asking him to nudge us and show us, and then when we know we've not loved correctly, to go back and say, you know what, I didn't love you right in that situation. But I think that goes with this tug of war that we're all in. And it goes back to what you shared at the beginning, Tabitha, that Romans 12 passage, where we're all in a tug of war constantly between conforming to the pattern of the world and letting God, through Jesus Christ, through his grace, mercy, change our minds about what life really looks like, right? So we've got the world telling us to live one way, and him saying, no, he goes, I go against everything the world's telling you. And so that tug of war we're having, and just allowing his voice to be the bigger voice. Because I think we all deal with that fear of the unknown, the approval of others, and I think allowing him to really convict us to the very core of who we are, that at the end of the day, as Galatians 1:10 says, Paul says to the Galatians, whose approval am I trying to earn? Because if I'm trying to earn the approval of anyone except for Jesus Christ, I'm not his servant. And like, that's what has to kind of be the thing that we keep coming back to, is like, am I loving in a way that he would love? Am I responding, reacting? And then let's be honest, sometimes love means speaking hard truths. And that's a hard way to love as well too. So it's not just like we're saying that we tell people what they want to hear, but we have to get close enough to them and earn the privilege through relationship, what you're talking about in Harlem. You learn through relationship, you earn the privilege of speaking into people's lives, a truth that you wouldn't be able to speak without relationship. And that comes by loving them like Jesus would love them, right?
Yeah. If our listeners have one takeaway from your story, what would you want it to be?
You're not bound by the world's limitations. And that you, through the grace of God, he will open up doors and for you to walk through in his timing. And it might not make sense, and it might not be feel like you can't do it, but through him it's possible, and he'll make you capable of it.
One of the things our pastor said recently was, somebody was saying, oh, I don't know, like, God's calling me, I'm scared, and he was like, do it scared. And that's what following God's call in your life is. It doesn't mean that there's no fear, right? I think about David and I have to imagine that in the core of his being, David was terrified when he was staring down the giant, but he knew, like, I've been put here for this time, so like, whatever it is, do it afraid, do it scared, right? Because the Lord, if he's open, like you just said, he's opening doors for you. He's paving the way for you. So, Anna Claire, thank you for sharing so openly and honestly with us today. Your story reminds us that God doesn't waste anything, even the hard parts of our life. He redefines our story through his love and uses what the enemy wants to use to destroy us, to help us walk into the fullness of life.
If you're listening today and you feel limited by labels, overwhelmed by your weaknesses, or unsure how God could use your story, remember this: God doesn't need perfection to do something powerful. The world may tell you that success looks like having it all together, but in God's kingdom, success often begins with surrender. His power is made perfect in your weakness. Your story does matter.
Be sure to subscribe to the 1211 podcast on YouTube and Spotify so you don't miss the next story of hope and transformation. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well. And if today's episode encouraged you, share it with a friend and help spread the message. There is power in telling your story.
We hope you'll join us next time when we'll spend time with a Christian counselor, author, and speaker who will share how God met her in her brokenness, bringing healing in a way that only He can. As God always does, He met her right where she was, in the middle of overwhelming circumstances. He has proven Himself again and again as she walks with others through the journey of rescue, redemption, restoration, and healing.
I can't wait. Make sure to join us. And in the meantime, we hope you too are finding the courage to share your story with others. Someone's freedom might just be on the other side of your testimony. So don't keep quiet, friends. Share what He's done for you.
Blessings, friends.